I remember walking into a petrol station because my sister had phoned me beforehand and she said, there's someone I want you to speak to. It's a solicitor. She knows who you are. She wants you to sue Rotherham Council and South Yorkshire Police for what happened to you. It didn't just happen to you, there were lots of people, and I just shut it down. I said, no, I'm not dealing with this. You know, mentally, I was just in a really bad place. But yeah, I walked into that petrol station. There was a newspaper article, and it didn't name anyone. It wasn't a story. It was just saying that, and it was really important how it was worded and the language that we used. And it said 54 girls had been befriended by 3 Asian brothers. And I knew straight away it was those 3 brothers just because of how prominent they were in the town. And I picked up the newspaper and I went home and I was reading it. And, you know, this is at the time when I was really suicidal. I started drinking. And all this, you know, realisation was coming at me, and I was feeling all these different emotions, and I was like, how can I have been so stupid, you know, not to have recognised it for what it was? I felt guilty. I blamed myself, you know, all the usual feelings that you'd have. And I thought, what the hell am I going to tell my son? Like, how am I going to tell him all of this? And yeah, it was just really difficult. So I had a complete breakdown, tried to kill myself, and mental health came out to see me. And how old was you? I was about 27 at this point. So 2012. This was about 2012 time. And I remember being sat on the chair, and when I was suicidal, it wasn't, you know, a cry for help. I really didn't want to be here. And I'd convinced myself as well that my kids would be better off without me. And I even wrote a letter to my kids for them to read after, you know, I were gone. Now, obviously, I know that they're not better off without me now. But obviously, when you're in such a dark place, you don't think clearly. But I started talking to one of the social workers, and I actually really liked her. And I know that my story, you know, if you go into depth to it, it talks about a lot of corruption and negligence from professionals. But what my story shows is when professionals get it right, it really can be life-changing. And she said to me, I think that, you know, something really bad has happened to you, and I think that you should talk to somebody about it. And I agreed. And the police officer came out to see me, and I knew she was straight away. I knew her from my childhood because her children would be cared for by my foster carer. And I also knew who she was from something else I tried to report a few years previous. So I knew that she weren't going to, you know, to help me. So I said to her, I want you to go away and see what evidence there is to support what I'm saying. I want to come forward. So she and another police officer came back, and I didn't tell them, but I actually recorded them on my mobile phone. And it's a good job I did. But she said, oh, well, there's only one piece of evidence. It's a missing persons report. I said, well, I've got DNA from my son. You know, I was 15 when I conceived. Oh, well, we won't like to tell your son because of his mental health with his ADHD and things. So, you know, that was a no-go. I said, well, what about my safety? I said, oh, well, you know, we can't, you know, kind of put a cop on you all the time. And it was just like everything I was suggesting. It was just a very can't be asked attitude. So I said, okay, well, there's no point me taking it any further then. And that was it. I left it. So what I then decided to do was just go and gather all my own evidence. So I got my police files, social care files, school files, medical records, everything. And I had the tape recording from the police. And I reached out to Andrew Norfolk at the Times newspaper. And Andrew, I think at the time, was very nervous around me because he had been told that I was still in contact with the insane. So I think he probably thought I was a little bit of a spy or whatever, you know. But I gave him all my evidence and I told him my story. And we went to print August 2013, but I had not waived my anonymity at this point. So they called me Jessica. But what I did was something different to what had been done so far in Rotherham, because my story weren't the first story that Andrew published. You know, he was in contact with survivors, family members and professionals. So he'd been printed, I think, about a year before I came along. And the authorities were just ignoring and investigating people. You know, nothing was happening. So when he published my story, I thought I was going to be ignored as well. And I remember him saying, you know, if this don't work, you know, I don't think anything will. But I named people. I named a rapist. I named Jahangir Akhtar, who was a then deputy leader of Rotherham Council, and I named P.T. Ali. And it started the criminal investigations. So, you know, if there's one thing I'm proud of is what my story achieved, even though it's, you know, caused me so much chaos in it. But it opened the criminal investigations, which was all the investigations in South Yorkshire now led by the National Crime Agency, and the biggest in British history. But it also commissioned the Alexis J report, which went on and showed that 1,400 children like me were groomed, abused, raped, trafficked, tortured, and some even murdered. So the Alexis J report, and even in the investigations, even though I'm out of it now and I've testified and I've done all my bit, it's still very personal for me because that report gave us the truth. You know, when I was coming forward and I was telling people everything what was happening, people said I was crazy. You know, they said I needed to be sectioned. And I remember even they placed me on antidepressants because, of course, I was unwell, and they said if I stopped taking them, they'd remove my children and put my children in care. What I needed is someone to actually sit down with me and properly go into it, everything, and to help me deal with all my trauma. And, you know, I understand that medication can be really good for people, but I personally think what's helped me is being in the gym. You know, that's been great for my mental health. And when people contact me, I always say do some form of fitness, but also my campaigning, because, you know, since I spoke out in August 2013, I've spoke about things thousands of times. But that's been like therapy for me. So I've kind of got it out there. And it's now at the point where it kind of makes me physically ill now I talk about it. I think I've overdone it. So I think it's important we get that line there. But yeah, it's been really helpful for me. But Jahangir Akhtar, they did his investigation first.
And who was he?
So he was the deputy leader when my story went to print of Rotherham Council, but he is related to my perpetrator. Now, what happened on one of the occasions when I was missing, the police and Jahangir got in contact with my rapist, and a no prosecution deal was made. And basically what that meant is, if you fetch her back, you won't be prosecuted. So he went to a petrol station. I can't remember if I was 14 or 15 at this time. I have to figure out my timeline. But he fetched me back, dropped me off, and he went on his way. And he's actually been found guilty on that now in court. But at the time when I exposed this, you know, Jahangir was, you know, saying all these stories. At first he was denying it, then he was coming up with, oh, I saved her, you know, I fetched her back and all this. And he stood down. So he was a Labour politician. He then got named by other people in court cases and things. But yeah, so people started to stand down, but I was still branded as this liar who's, you know, just exaggerated and making all these things up because, you know, people couldn't fathom that, you know, children as young as like probably 10 and 11 years old were being, you know, kind of raped and tortured and all this, and the authorities were turning a complete blind eye because the report showed that majority of them were Pakistani Muslim men. They didn't want to be called racist or Islamophobic. So it was easy for them to just call us little white slags and lovesick teenagers that kept going back. And if I'm honest, it's, you know, I think probably it's even worse now in some respects of you can't kind of challenge anything if somebody's religious or a person of colour. So I don't think we've improved with everything yet, but things started happening. And that's the reason why I continued to speak out. And I remember at first, the police officer, they got removed off the case, and the police said to me, okay, do you want South Yorkshire Police to deal with this or do you want the National Crime Agency? And I said South Yorkshire Police. So they dealt with the first couple of trials. But to get into court, it was, I think, 3 years. And, the previous cop was like, okay, because Andrew Norfolk went to them as a right to reply when my story was published. So everybody started going wild, thinking, holy shit, Sammy's coming with a story. And they came to me and said, okay, we'll investigate it, but you don't do the story because it'll jeopardise the court case. So I had the decision, do I run the story or do I run the court case? And thank God I chose to still run the story, because things would have been very, very different if the media wouldn't have been involved. I wouldn't be alive for a start if the media weren't involved. It kind of came my safety bubble. But when the new police officers come in and I was just doing interview after interview. So it was like 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it came to the point I was so scared not to do an interview. And I couldn't possibly do them all, but because people were coming forward and they were saying, well, we've seen Sammy, on the news or on Facebook or whatever. Because even though I wasn't named at that point, I was so well known in the community, everybody knew who I was anyway. And I remember the police officer saying to me, keep doing what you're doing, it's working. So it took so long because it was just building and building and, lots of people was coming forward. But yeah, we eventually got to court and I was known as Girl J. I was kind of more so at the back of the queue as such. And it was difficult as well because the trial was Christmas time. I also, because my dad and sister were witnesses and I was very close to my sister at that point, so we weren't allowed to have contact because they would say we was cahooting together. I weren't allowed contact with a lot of the girls. So I remember seeing one girl and we couldn't even talk. We kind of just had to go in opposite directions when we saw each other out on the street. There was kind of so much around it and the whole world was watching. This, it was the biggest trial of the country. And I don't know who it was. I don't know whether it was the police or not, but they tried to put a media ban on the trial. And I found out about it. And I wrote a letter and I gave it to Andrew Norfolk at the Times. And in this letter, it was me explaining to the judge why it was so important that there wasn't a media ban on it. We'd fought for years to be heard and, we're finally here. So I went into all of that and it actually worked. She lifted the media ban. There was one defendant who couldn't be named. He was my rapist brother and that's because he pleaded guilty. The police were going mental at me because I didn't even tell the police I'd wrote this letter. So they're ringing me up. They're going, oh my God, what have you done? What have you done? If I'm honest, I couldn't give a shit. This was our time now. But of course, they was trying to protect, their job and what they were doing. But yeah, I was only meant to be in court for 2 hours. Anybody that knows me knows once I start talking, I don't shut the fuck up. So when I got in there, the first couple of questions, he's coming at me. And the only advice you're given is just answer yes or no. That's it. And so he's coming up with these questions, but it wasn't a kind of yes or no answer. And I'm sat there and I'm thinking, this guy's killing me. He's kind of really hammering me. So I just started to talk, and I'm kind of just getting out there. So my 2 hours turned into 2 days. And I remember at one point he just sat down and I think he just thought, fucking hell, because I'm just coming out with all this stuff. And what I didn't know at the time is that a lot of stuff I was saying originally wasn't allowed to be used as evidence in the court case. So that tape recording I had of the police originally weren't allowed in. But because I'm, kind of sat there telling them all these things about what's happening, it was then allowed in. But in total, there was that many charges. They had to stop because they were saying there's too many. And what was annoying for me is because I was criminally exploited as well, they wasn't charged with anything in regards to criminal exploitation. It was only the sexual side. So when I said to the police, well, why are you not charging them for the criminal stuff? And he said, well, we've got too much on the sexual exploitation. We don't even need it.
What was the criminal stuff?
So the criminal exploitation stuff, so, he would teach me how to drive. So I was driving at 14. He would take me on armed robberies, kind of getting me involved in different kind of different crimes, which is very good for perpetrators to do, because what that actually does is stop you from coming forward. Because if you do, you know, you're kind of sending yourself to prison. So when I came forward and exposed Rotherham, my legal team had to go and have private meetings with the police and whoever was there, I don't know if it was CPS, because I was saying to the police, well, I want to be honest about everything. You know, he was taking me on these armed robberies and these post offices, what we're getting robbed and things. You know, I've got all the information, I can tell you. But I was looking at going to prison myself. So I was actually looking at 102 years.
102 years?
Yeah. So that was the same amount of time that all the defendants in that trial got put together. It was the exact same number. Now, you know, what I want to make very clear is I weren't involved in having people raped or anything like that. It was crimes such as the post offices and, you know, kind of selling drugs and stuff like that. So, you know, you have these people that have raped people, done all these things, and I'm looking at the same amount of time, and he's not looking at charges for taking me on armed robberies, but I am. So they decided that I wouldn't go on trial because I was a victim, I was a child, very rightly so. But I do honestly think if I didn't have the times back in me, I think I would have been on trial with them.
And when you come forward, because you read front page of that newspaper that there was 54 girls had said that 3 Asian men had befriended them.
Yeah.
Did you have any idea of the commercial scale that it actually was?
Oh, no. When I thought about things, I thought the 2 years that I knew him. And as well, what you've got to remember is he kept a lot of things away from me to do with the girls. So the couple of girls that was coming up, he would say, oh, they're ex-girlfriends. But then I kind of started to think, because as well, I was allowed friends. So when he was controlling me, he wouldn't completely shut me off. I was allowed friends. I mean, he raped all of them, but I was allowed them. So it was people like that I was thinking of. I thought, you know, it might be a couple of hundred. I had no idea. And the thing is as well, what you've got to remember is when the number 1,400 came in, there's a lot of voices that have been left out of that. So, for example, I was getting contacted, and not by a great deal, but I was getting contacted by women in the Pakistani community. And they were saying, Sammy, this has happened to me as well, but I've never been able to tell anyone because it'll shame the family, I won't be able to get married, etc. Boys, in fact, one guy in Rotherham, he contacted me. In fact, he actually wanted to speak out. I was actually in the process of helping him do that. He was abused, he turned to drugs. He didn't live, he died. So there's been lots of voices lost out of the 1,400, I think.
You say that there was young boys that were being abused. So were these criminal gangs grooming young boys into becoming criminals themselves and doing the dirty work for them?
Yeah, so there was boys that were being sexually abused, but there was also boys being criminally exploited, so selling drugs, hiding weapons. I know someone that were, you know, kind of took on robberies and things like that, just like I was. And yeah, some of them, you know, kind of being groomed to become perpetrators as well. So there's been a lot of lost voices from the 1,400. You know, we always talk about this happening to little girls, but truth is it's happening to boys as well.
From the same community?
Yeah.
And how old, and how young were some of these boys?
Well, they would have been the same age as me. So, you know, this was happening to me it started when I was 14. But of course, we know that there were people younger than me as well.
And do you think grooming, abusing, raping is still going on in Rotherham, irrespective of the expose?
Oh, of course it is. I mean, what the difference is now, what you've got from when I was a kid, you've got all this online, you know, all the social media stuff. So it's a lot easier now to access children. As before, it was, you know, you're pretty much out on the street, you know, wrong place, wrong time for me. But yeah, I think it's a lot easier now for paedophiles.
So when these guys are on trial, how many of them did you take to trial?
I only testified against one, but I gave information about lots that I could remember. So, but I was cross-examined by his brother's barrister.
Right.
Because before I met him, he kissed me. He was trying to groom me, but I didn't get groomed by him.
And how many of them pled not guilty?
All of them, apart from one. But what was interesting is when he pled guilty, he was actually on charges connected to the others. So when the others were saying, well, that didn't happen and I didn't do it, well, he's saying, well, actually, yeah, it did. Now, when I was talking to a police officer, he said that out of everybody, he showed the most remorseful, pleaded guilty, which I think is bollocks because he tried to have me murdered when I come forward. So that's not remorseful. What he did was he was looking at a big sentence because I'm told the torture that he did towards the children would have been up there with 35 years like his brother. So for me, he's just trying to knock some time off his time, which is actually due out now, actually, in the next couple of months.
When you was in the dock and you were being cross-examined, was there any stage where you felt like you were on trial?
Oh, yeah, all the way through it. All the way through it. And for me, I wanted to go into the room because you can do it by video link. I wanted to go in there. I wanted to see the jury. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to know that I'm a person. And I was actually very confident as a witness. I didn't cry. I didn't do anything. In fact, afterwards, when I spoke to people, they said that might actually go against you because of how kind of strong you came across. But that's my character, and I wanted to go in there and be myself. And I remember saying, there's nowhere on this planet the last words that bastard is from me is me in tears. But and I remember a police officer saying to me as well, he says, I've seen lots of these cases and it's very difficult to watch. He says, but you, it weren't, because as I say, I was very strong and confident. But the whole time I felt on trial, even now I still get called a liar. So when I was in there wasn't many questions about my actual abuse because my evidence was so strong. They couldn't mess with it. So what I spoke about and what was aimed at me was all the media stuff because for 3 years every day I've told the world what's happened. I've named people. I've gone into graphic detail. So they're trying to throw that at me, which they didn't really have a leg to stand on because I did nothing wrong and my evidence spoke for itself. So it was an experience that I'll never forget. And even though I was so confident, I feel like it took a piece of my soul and I've never got it back. It's really strange. And I mean, I was an adult. I could say I was confident. Imagine what it's like for kids to go into that environment. It's very daunting. You walk in and it's, official courtroom and you've got all these people suited and booted. And I remember walking in as well and before the jury got fetched in. And I walked through and two of the barristers who was going to question me, they kind of looked and tried to intimidate me. It's very much a pantomime.
When you eventually come forward and you find the courage to do so and you want to make a change, for the perpetrators to go not guilty, what they're saying is you're lying.
Yeah.
And they're always going to get Klingons and minions and flying monkeys that are going to back them up.
Yeah.
And then you've got a gang of people saying the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of hassle I've had is insane. And I expected it from them. I mean, people even said to me, I can't believe you're still alive. I'll be honest, I do think I'll be killed for it. A consequence will come to me for what I've done.
You truly believe that?
Yeah, I do, yeah. Whether they come for my son or something else, they've tried it, it's just not worked yet.